Grace and Peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Bible Study. The peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, and the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. And we are looking at worship, our series on how to put work back into worship, connecting our beliefs with our work. This is week 7 of that series, and this week we are talking about sin and work. This is the third video of this week. The first video talked about how sin impacts the worker and how the worker's sin impacts the work. And the second video of this week talked about how sinful work can impact creation and the brokenness of creation impacts the work. And this video for this week, the third video of this week, is going to talk about the impact of sinful work on the community and how sin in the community can impact our work as well. We've been looking at Genesis 3, the fall of man, how sin introduced itself into the good world of God. And just looking at this verse, he said to the woman, I will intensify your labor pains. You will bear children in anguish. Your desire will be for your husband, yet he will rule over you. Now, putting this in context with Genesis chapter 2, we learned earlier from 2 weeks ago when we talked about working in community, we learned that the man or the human was placed in the garden to work it, and in that context of naming the animals and working in the garden, it was seen that that human was to be alone, and that human, as that human ruled over the creation, that human who was alone was not good, so that human was given a helper to do the work of ruling over creation, and Adam and Eve became the first human, got a second human, and they were designed to work together in creation to rule it, as Genesis 1:26 and 31 says. But think about this. One human was made into two humans so that they could work together to rule creation. However, when sin enters into the picture, one human is now set to rule the other human. The man will rule over the woman, a direct result of the sin. So not humanity ruling over creation together, but one human using work to rule over the other human. And it's always interesting to see in this 3:17 and 18 talk about Adam's labor with the work in producing food, whereas Eve's labor as in giving birth. And so many cultures use a similar word for work and for birth. It's just fascinating in that context. As we know and as we see, work changes things. This is part of our work definition. Work changes things, and work changes the community. Good work provides for others. Bad work uses others. And sin affects this. As we work, our sin can impact how our work affects others, and the sinfulness of the community has a direct impact on our work. This could be kind of supply and demand. We can supply bad work to our community, having a bad impact in them, or our community can demand a bad work from us or compensate us badly for the work that we do. Martin Luther thought a lot about how work is a communal sort of thing. So in the tradition of Martin Luther, it would be good to take a moment and note how much human work goes into one meal. How much work is necessary for that community producing event. Now, as a Baptist minister, I'm not so sure we can have fellowship and community without the idea of food. But looking at how much work goes into a simple meal, Think about it. Tables and chairs, utensils and plates, ovens and refrigerators, all the products of human work that make the meal possible. That is not even including the food, but if we look at the food, there's farmers, bakers, butchers, deliverers, grocers, all have a part in that process. And all of them use tools and equipment produced by other workers. It is almost limitless to think how much human work goes into forming of a community around the table for a meal. When we eat the work of many, many people. And work is dependent upon the community. Now let's look at some ideas of how sin in community could actually impact that table. The table could be empty if, good work that whoever owns the table is not properly and sufficiently compensated by the community. If you're working hard and not getting enough to eat, that might be a community sort of problem. The table could be lonely if those in your community are required to work too many hours to sit down and have a meal together. The table could be dangerous if someone somewhere in the process did not do their job well, from the baker to the butcher to the transport team. The table could be competition if we think that having food on our table as actually the direct result of others not having food on theirs. If we think that food is a limited resource, we could see ourselves that our table in competition to other tables, or the table could be unhealthy, or if our community sells us ideas about food that are not good for us. The community and sinfulness in the community can easily impact the work we do and how that work produces a good product like food. Now, I'm using food here as an example and just thinking of all the work that goes into putting good food on the table. The community's expectations can impact the goodness of that work. Now, thinking about your profession, do you believe your profession is appropriately valued by our community? Why or why not? What type of professions do you feel are undervalued? Which are overvalued by our community? Based on our previous lists of undervalued or overvalued professions, what type of sin do you think causes us to treat these professions this way? I mean, does it make sense that entertainers like football players make more money than teachers and educators? Is there something to be said there? Is that an appropriate value? Now, is there a sinfulness in that value? I don't know. You talk about that amongst yourself in your group or think through some of those ideas. Our community, because it is fallen, is sinful, and quite often we can place value in different ways with different folks. Now, let's look through this. This is a story. It's a parable. I'm going to end with the parable this week. And Brian works in a laboratory. He is the laboratory manager for a study dealing with HIV-associated dementia. It is amazing that he has had this opportunity. If the lab is able to complete their research, they may be able to change the entire world. They might be able to not only better understand a debilitating part of AIDS, but it would have direct implications for other brain diseases and disorders. Brian's job currently contributes to the good of the world. He finds great significance in doing the daily routines that are required of him. He has a true sense of purpose at his job. The work environment is amazing as well. Brian's boss has taken it upon herself to encourage his professional development. She has taught him so much and has given him so many opportunities to learn and improve. He couldn't imagine a better place to work. It is so much better than the previous laboratory he worked in. For example, Brian's boss included his name on their most recent publication in a scientific journal, which is not necessarily the norm for laboratory managers with only a bachelor's degree. which makes it frustrating that Brian struggles with doing some parts of the work. When Brian was a child, he got sick from bacterial meningitis. There were a few days when the doctors were uncertain if he would live. Obviously, he lived, but not without problems. Brian functions normally, and without him telling you, you may not notice anything different. But he is completely deaf in one ear. His speech has only developed after years of therapy. The nerves to the semicircular canals in his ears are damaged, resulting in a lack of balance and muscle coordination. This combination of problems makes the clean room microdissections a process that is right at the edge of Brian's ability. Brian often wonders if it would be better for everyone if he let someone else who is more physically competent have his job. Now, looking through that, what effects has sin had on this work environment? Kind of a summary, what we've talked through all the time. The work environment only exists because of the fallenness of creation. In a perfect world, HIV/AIDS doesn't exist. So the work itself is dependent upon a sinful thing in the world and is dependent upon human beings being saints trying to overcome and restore creation to the way it should be. Also, Brian's frustration and problems at work are because of creation's fallenness as well. The bacterial meningitis that has let him, under ability to engage the work in that way. But there are ways that sin hasn't impacted this work. Seemed like the community was still good. The work that Brian was doing was still valuable. There are ways that sin hadn't impacted it. There were good things being discovered and there was good work being done. So as you look through all this, you can see the community might have been good, but the creation and sinfulness there wasn't so bad. You can see, all sorts of ways that sin impacted it, but also sin could have impacted it even greater. So as we come to a conclusion in this week, let's just kind of look at this. Good work that is done in a worshipful relationship with God has to be good for the worker by humanely developing the worker's character, good for creation by adding value to natural resources in stewardship, and good for the community as an expression of loving service. And unfortunately, sin can impact good work in all of these areas. Now, looking at the homework, just some things to think through and sort of stuff to think about. What areas of your life are you trying to become more Christ-like? Or do you have discipleship tasks in your life right now? And can your work be used by God to develop Christ-likeness in this area? Include in your prayers that God uses your work to overcome sinfulness in your life, fallenness in creation, and separation in community. Ask God to bless your work to further his kingdom. Also, something to think about. If you could solve one major problem in the world through your work, what would it be? As always, there are 2 ways to join: live Monday nights at 7 p.m. via Zoom, or the weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and WordPress. Those details are in the comments or in the description below. I am all over social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, and YouTube. Again, those links are in the description below as well. I really enjoyed this fascinating conversation about work and sin, and how sin impacts our work, and how sinfulness in our work can impact the rest of the world. I hope to continue it with you sometime soon.